everybody, welcome back to the Blue Bench. My name's Georgia Hawthorne, and I'm the social media manager for the Montana Democratic Party.
I'm Shannon O'Brien, former legislator, statewide candidate, and I was a teacher.
Yes, and Shannon woke up hot to trot this morning, so she's going to give you the rundown of what we're going to tell you today.
We've got a lot to cover in a short amount of time. We're going to talk about the big, bad, terrible, horrible bill a little bit more because that needs to, we all need to be aware of it. We'll talk also about the middle class and how it is disappearing and continues to disappear. And then we're going to leave you all with a little bit of hope for the Democratic Party. But first, there's all sorts of drama.
So we got to talk about this breakup, Shannon, because the girls are fighting. Elon and Trump were going at it all day long on social media this week, and it got really out of hand.
Yeah, I think about the concept of loyalty and, looking out for the best of the whole, but tell me more.
Okay, so it started because Elon stepped down from his position a couple of weeks ago, I think. And then as this big, bad, beautiful bill comes out of the House, Elon starts saying that this bill is terrible and horrible, and he's really mad because it raises the deficit by trillions of dollars. And that didn't go very well for him. Everyone was kind of like, I thought we were on the same team here. Why are you bad-mouthing your friend? Why are you bad-mouthing your president? But so after Elon made all of these comments, Donald Trump weighed in, and he basically said, well, Elon, if you're concerned about spending, we can cut back on government spending quite a bit by taking away all of your government contracts. Which, for a guy like Elon, is a pretty serious threat, considering Tesla, SpaceX, Starlink, all of those things have some kind of government contract.
Yeah.
And a lot of that money funds
significant
that work. Yeah. Elon did not take very kindly to this. He replied and basically said that the reason why the Trump administration refuses to release the Jeffrey Epstein files, that was a huge part of their campaign, by the way, was that they were going to release these files. Elon claimed that the reason they're not doing that is because Donald Trump's name will show up in the files.
I saw Stephen Colbert's response to this. He explained this, and he was like, "Oh,
no, right?"
We laugh about it, and it is drama, and it is like that kind of thing. But we're also, what's just heartbreaking is we're also at this point where we're giggling about it and laughing about it and drama. And this is the president of the United States and his one-time deputy who was not confirmed, but was still having a significant impact and in our government. And it's like this, I want to jump right into the drama of it and the gossip of it. And oh my gosh. But if you step back, there's something very kind of eerie about.
No, it's weird.
About and it's just, these are the grown-ups
calling the shots
that are running our country.
That is terrifying.
Something's wrong.
But mainly I have to laugh about it, otherwise I'll cry about it.
Okay. So moving on, let's talk a little bit about more seriously this big, terrible, horrible bill that that's what I'm calling it. That absolutely, totally cuts taxes for our wealthiest, and it adds to our debt. And it also makes phenomenal, horrible funding cuts to these programs that serve our United States citizens.
Mm-hmm. At this point, I feel like if there is a program that the government funds that is even slightly beneficial to the general public, it's being cut in some shape or form right now. That's how widespread these cuts are.
And we could go into long details about all of them. I encourage all of our listeners to do a little bit of homework and kind of probe a little bit, but certainly to Medicaid, to education, across the board, to nutrition support for folks. But this is the prime time contact senators.
Absolutely.
It's in the Senate right now. And we just need a handful of Republican senators who will do the right thing.
I believe the number is actually 4. That is how many votes they can lose. The Republican votes they can lose in the Senate is 4. If they lose anything more than that, the bill will automatically fail. It definitely doesn't look good on the Senate side, though, for the Republicans. I know there's 4 for sure who have come out as either a hard no or probably a no. And since all of this stuff with Elon and Trump has happened, confidence in it getting passed has nosedived, essentially.
I just want to reiterate, call your senators.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's amended, if there's some kind of wheeling and dealing going on, it has to go back to the House. So be prepared to call members of Congress too, but call your senators.
You can call the Capitol switchboard. It's going to be 202-224-3121, and you just
repeat it.
202-224-3121, and you just call and say, hi, I'd like to speak to Senator Daines' office, and they will transfer you over there. I will put their direct phone numbers to both their DC office and their Helena offices in the description, but you can call either way.
And you can, if you didn't get that number, you can just Google
Capitol switchboard
or Senator Daines, and you can call the local office or the DC office.
I will do a mini plug. There's an app called 5Calls that folks tend to really like, and you download it, and it will, I believe it gives you scripts, and it'll connect you to all of your Senate and representatives, and it's much easier to do that, some say, than calling everyone individually. Great. So that's an option too. All right, so outside of that, we told you guys that we would talk about the shrinking of the middle class, and this is something that is super important, both as a country, but also in this political moment, because a lot of what people focus on is the middle class when it comes to running a campaign. But Shannon, I've heard this is happening my literal entire life. I'm 22. I feel like the second I learned how to think and read critically, I've been hearing about this. But I've also noticed that we don't really use the term middle class anymore. We tend to use the phrase working people or the working class, which honestly I kind of like. I think that is more all-encompassing because it includes the lower class and the middle class, but it's also very clear that we're not talking about billionaires and the 1%. Now, don't take any offense to this, but you've been able to actually see this play out in your life.
Yeah, that's right.
What has that been like?
That's right. Yeah, so I was born in 1968, 1970s. It was a reasonable goal to, if you were truly in the working class. My parents bought their first house. My dad was driving trucks and working for Avis. My mom was not working, and they were able to save up for a down payment and buy a home. And then even when I was in my 30s, I was not married yet. I had student debt from, I went to Gonzaga for my master's, and I had some debt there, but I was still able on my own. I rented a room to help, but I was able to buy my own home, and because I had saved up money and I crunched the numbers and it was feasible. And now all of us, it wasn't all of a sudden, but somehow all of a sudden there is this simple redistribution of wealth, and the wealthy are getting wealthier, and the middle class is shifting to the lower income bracket, and which essentially means that working class or that middle class is absolutely shrinking. So the dream of owning a home, and I really focus on home ownership as a way out of poverty, or as a way of growing wealth. And when I bought that house all by myself, which obviously the bank owned it, but I felt like I was writing a check to Shannon O'Brien every month, age 80. That money was going to invest in my retirement. So that's the piece that I think is just so sad. And as I went through the campaign, the statewide, when I ran for superintendent, I ran into multiple people who were talking about teachers and how we are having a serious teacher shortage crisis right now because teachers can't make a living and they can't support their families. I had one superintendent whose son went into education, and he was like, I was so proud of him. And he taught for a couple of years, and he discovered that he could almost double his salary, his teaching salary, driving a milk truck.
Really?
And so he had 2 young kids, and so he left the teaching profession to drive truck. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
There's nothing wrong with that, as long as we have got to prioritize education, for example. And so that's the issue we're dealing with, is that working class, and the direction we're going are tax cuts for the wealthy. The Republican agenda is tax cuts for the wealthiest, with this really antiquated trickle-down economics.
Yes.
And if you talk to economists around the world or the country and in Montana, that tax cuts for the wealthiest is not the way for a strong economy.
Right. And I've seen some stats that way back in the 70s, the top 10%, the upper class, only owned like 29% of the wealth or something around that number in this country.
Yeah.
And present day, they own just about half of all of the wealth in the United States, despite only making up like 19% of the population. And like, I don't do math. I don't like math, never really have, but like this math I can figure out. So we have 19% of the population with half of the wealth, which leaves 81% of the population with the other half.
Yeah.
That, like, there's no way that that is even close to fair or equal or balanced. And that's part of the problem. And you mentioned trickle-down economics, and the whole concept is like, oh, well, if we give all of these rich CEOs a tax cut, maybe they'll use that money to pay their workers better or hire more workers or things like that. And I kind of don't want to live my whole life dependent on hoping they wake up in the morning and decide that they want to be a good person. I would rather just be able to do it myself.
I think that it's when you back way up and kind of philosophize and look at the role of government and based on human nature.
Mm-hmm.
And, people are going to vote what they think their pocketbook will look like.
Right.
And that's, I think, something that was really interesting to witness is people's savings and retirements did really well under multiple Democrat presidentials when they were presidents. And also you look at the deficit, and the deficits were lowered when Democrats were in office. So, it's a really important issue to talk about, and we need to reverse that redistribution of wealth.
Right, because you see, like, I've always been told that, like, getting a college education is, like, your fast track out of the lower class, out of the middle class, even. That is, like, quote unquote, the promise when you go to college, is you spend your 4 years, you spend your money, you get your degree, and then you're supposed to be able to live this stable life where you make good money because you already invested. And I don't know if that college promise is still shaking out the way it used to. I know a lot of my friends have a lot of debt and they can't find jobs and things like that. And that's neither here nor there. But the concept of pushing everyone towards college is that you're seeing parts of the middle class shift down into the lower classes because they're living paycheck to paycheck, because government programs are getting cut and they're having to spend extra money and things like that.
The bottom line is you talk to any financial planner and they will continue to say your best return on investment is education. Mm-hmm. And that might be a 2-year technical degree or certificate for plumbing or electrician or some of those trades, but a 4-year education as well will get you a significantly higher salary.
True.
Statistically. Now, does that salary get you a house eventually? That's the problem.
Right. No, and you absolutely summed that up perfectly. Going to school is still worth it by leaps and bounds. What I meant by that is that it doesn't get you as far as it used to. And a lot of that and that's what's happening to a lot of the middle class. Wages aren't keeping up with inflation. Union protections are shaky in a lot of places, which makes it a lot harder. Things like that. It's really hard when 20% of the country owns half the wealth. You get to fight over the rest of it, and it doesn't get you nearly as far as it did 20 years ago.
And as you know, we're both union members.
It's so true.
And Montana, as most people know, is a strong union state. And I just have to say the impact that union members have in the legislative sessions is absolutely phenomenal. And we might have a strong Republican influence in the legislature right now, but there were union buster bills that come every single session, and they consistently, year after year after year, fail. And that is a tribute to the power of the unions, but the power of the recognition how important our working class is. So we're going to keep fighting that fight.
Right, because unions essentially are what give you a work-life balance.
Could you imagine? I think about when the unions started, and I've served in administration during a time when we were making major budget cuts, and I had to essentially, with the support of my leadership team, make these tough calls. And I could see a number of times if I wasn't working closely with the union, or if there was not a union, I can see how easy it would be for administration to justify terrible, horrible things.
Yeah.
Unfair things. But I also think about the working environment, working 12-hour days, 7 days a week, maybe 6 days a week.
I like working 40 hours a week. I don't know about you.
And if I choose to work more, then I choose to work more.
Right.
But yeah, it's really important.
Yes, absolutely. I will say, I think we talk a lot about bad things, and we give a lot of bad news on this podcast. And I don't think that's our fault. I think that is a product of our current political climate. But I think it would be good if we gave folks some hope. Do you have any talkers on hope today?
Well, as a matter of fact, this might not look like hope, but Time Magazine, and I'm not, I think it's important to look at where you're getting your news. But Time Magazine this week has a cover that says Lost, and it has a picture of a donkey. And then it says, The Democrats, last seen November 4th, 2024. And it's a clever cover. And at first, when I saw this, I'm like, oh, no. And then the more I thought about it, and as I'm reading the article, and it had interviews with many folks who were involved with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. But we don't rise from the ashes immediately. And I'll tell you that November 4th, as a statewide candidate and as a voter, that was a tough moment for us. And the 5th was bad, and the 6th was bad,
and it was bad for a while.
And we've just wrapped up somewhat recently the legislative session, which kind of distracted us, I think, for a lot of folks. But as I was reading this article and thinking more about it, we are not lost. We are at this moment that I think is hopeful of a serious time to shift gears altogether. Maybe not even shift gears, change vehicles.
Yeah.
Get a whole new fleet and really look at why we failed so badly and what we need to be doing better to communicate our values, because we know that our democratic values of a strong education, right now of housing, strong working class, healthcare, all of a clean and healthful environment, all of these things, when you talk to Republicans and Democrats and independents, that's what Montanans value.
Yeah.
So somehow we're not communicating that, or we're not. And one of the pieces that came out here, and I believe strongly, and I'm hearing from other rumblings, is that we're not doing a good job when we're campaigning. We're not doing a good job of listening first.
I've heard this too.
And we need to shift gears there. We're looking at trying to persuade voters on the doors or on the phone, and we haven't been listening. And we need to do more listening so that people build some trust and understand. One of the things we were fighting wasn't just competing against. We weren't competing just against our Republican opponents. We were also competing against the couch. Yeah. Getting people to the polls to understand why this is so important.
Shannon, you mentioned failure and being able to say why we failed. And I would argue that there is a decent chunk of this party on a national level that still has yet to admit that we failed. Yeah. And I think that is the first step. Yeah. November 5th came and went, and it's been 6 months since then, and we can either keep ruminating on it and driving ourselves crazy over it, or we can say, we screwed up. We didn't do this right. We didn't do that right. We need to be better here. and move forward. But the entire party, and I mean leadership, and I just mean like normal Democrats, the more we sit and stew on our loss, the worse off we're going to be. That's not productive. We have to get in a room, put our heads together, and actually figure it out. Otherwise, we're just going to keep losing.
So according to Ken Martin, and there's a plug for the podcast interview with Ken Martin, don't miss that. And he was interviewed in this article. The national Democrats will be coming out with a strategy this summer. And I might push back a bit because I think most Democrats who have been active see that we failed and that this is an opportunity to change. And then I also think, and you and I have talked about this before, that for those of you listeners who think that who want to go away from the party, or who are thinking the Democratic Party is failing, we are the Democratic Party.
It's us.
We are it, and it's just like government. You know what I mean? If you're not happy with what's happening in Helena or what's happening in Washington D.C., do something about it. That's how our constitutions are set up. So the social studies teacher in me will stop preaching right now. But I just saw the story about Death Valley in California has had, they call it Death Valley because nothing grows there. It's a desert and it never rains and it's hot. And it was for years and years and years. And in recent years, there was actually it was a flood, but it was a major downpour hit Death Valley and record-breaking rain. And lo and behold, months later, out of the sand came wildflowers.
Really?
For the first time in decades, I don't know, maybe centuries, but I'm guessing decades. And we can place blame on climate change or whatever that might be, but it made me think of the Democratic Party as this, like, we are not dead. We are just dormant, and our wildflowers are coming, and there is hope, but only if we all contribute, if we all stay apart.
And I wouldn't even say dormant, because there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that aren't necessarily always visible to the public. And I know that feels kind of weird and sketchy, but it's for the most part just internal conversations about where did we go wrong? What did we do so wrong that got us in this position? And what can we do moving forward? It's really a pivotal moment of we can either keep trying the same things that haven't worked, or we can throw out the playbook and write a new one and try to flip things around in 2026. And I will say, from specifically a Montana Democratic standpoint, is that it's been really hard because we don't have Democrats in office. We don't have a John Tester in the Senate anymore for us to be like, hey, John, you got to go out there and like fight the good fight, my friend, because you're the only one here who's doing that. We have no real pull at the national level anymore because we don't have any federal Democrats elected. And that has been the hardest part, I think, for us as a state party, is finding out how we win our voters back, number one, but also how do we continue to influence the political landscape when we don't have electeds in office to do it for us.
I'm going to put a plug, though, in for our legislature and
absolutely.
the legislative wins, and we have so many more House members, up to 42 from 32, and Senate members as well, and the power that we pulled from the 9 moderate Republicans, and it is really interesting how there is so much focus on the U.S. presidential race and who's going to be our next candidate there, and that's as though that one person is the leader. And Tim Walz said to us at the Mansfield Metcalf dinner, he said, if you're waiting for that charismatic, phenomenal leader to show up and carry us to our vision and our power and, power to the people and gain it back. He's like,
you're dreaming.
yeah. He said, you're it. You're it. You're it. You're it. We're all it. And we're all responsible for that to take place. And I loved hearing that. I loved hearing that from him to everyone.
I will also say that, and you make a great point. Everyone's like, okay, well, 2028, who are we going to run? Who's going to be in the primary? Who's going to beat Donald Trump? Blah, 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 blah. 2028 is 4 years away. And like, I know that doesn't feel like a long time, really, but a lot can happen in 4 years. Look what Biden's term started as and ended as. That was 4 years. I am much more concerned about, local elections this fall, especially here in Montana. We've got city council, county commission, all of the school boards.
Yeah.
All of those elections are happening this fall. Those are so important. And then in 2026, we have state legislature elections, but also Senator Daines' seat is up.
That's right.
And both House seats will be up. Yeah. And right now, the margins, and we've talked about this in reference to the big, horrible, terrible bill, is that the margins in both chambers are really, really tight.
That's right.
And if the only thing that Democrats manage to do in 2026 is flip one chamber, flip the House, flip the Senate, flip one of them, we are going to be in an infinitely better position than we are right now. And I think that has to be the focus, is the midterms.
And the careful analysis of the voting behavior shows that House District 1, Zinke is very vulnerable.
Absolutely.
And
he has been. Every race he's run.
That's a winnable seat for Democrats. So we'll see where that winds up. And, you talk about that timeline, and I also think of certainly this November 2025 with those more local elections, 2026, 2028, but politics is a long game.
Yes, it is.
And we're building relationships, and we're trying to ensure that we're also looking into the long future. And I think that was one of the pieces, and I think a lot of folks think this, but that the Republicans have us beat on, is that they started decades ago, Newt Gingrich and others, making this long-term plan. And so that's part of where we'll need to go. But well, stay tuned, and we're going to have some good stuff for you
next week.
All right.